In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. Whatever the virtues of the many fields of knowledge, all their steps on the path of omniscience, may these arise in the clear mirror of intellect. O Manjushri, please accomplish this. Good evening, welcome. Nice to see everyone. Good evening, welcome. Nice to see everyone. Hope you're all well. So tonight we continue making our way slowly but surely into and then someday through this entire book, the Moonbeams of Mahamudra. So, if my memory serves me, sometimes it does, we ended on the bottom of page 42, just before the explanation of the results. Does anyone agree? Anyone disagree? All right, we got a couple agreements. Cool. The explanation of the results. Expecting a lot here. Unraveling the intent, the usual a source that our author begins with, because it is the sutra spoken by the Buddha or attributed to the Buddha. So it's the earliest and the most important and authentic source. What are the results of those? Shamatha and Vipassana. Pure mind is the result. Pure prajna is the result. Looking forward to that someday. In that statement, pure mind is the result of shamatha, and pure prajna, is that of vipassana. Pure mind means that thoughts involving mental afflictions have been purified. Pure prajna means that the latent tendencies of ignorance have been purified. So the two obscurations, the two obstructions, to enlightenment, kleshas, mental afflictions, and then cognitive ignorance or cognitive errors, the latent tendencies of ignorance. The same text teaches that shamatha and vipassana liberate us from two forms of bondage. Bhagawan, what are the functions of shamatha and vipassana? Bhagawan answers, Maitreya, they liberate you from two forms of bondage, the bondage of characterizations and the bondage of negative propensities. And he gives them in reverse order. The prajna is freedom from characterizations, which is a very odd way to phrase the situation, but involves not mistaking signs or characteristics that our senses and our senses perceive, and that our mind distinguishes or discriminates as indicating that there's something there. And negative propensity is the mental afflictions. It is also explained that during this life, shamatha reverses our attachment to sense pleasures, gives rise to supercognitive abilities and samadhis, and in future lives, it results in the attainment of a God's form that is free from desire, meaning the God realms above the desire realm, there being three realms: the realm of desire, form realms, and the formless. And the God realms span from desire all the way up to the formless, and the form and formless realms are affiliated with or correlated with the meditative absorptions, the form absorptions, the four dhyana states, and then the four formless absorptions result in the formless realms. And so the result of shamatha vipassana results in some attainment in either the form or formless realms. The verses that summarize the Prajna Paramita Sutra explains, and what is this? The Prajna Paramita Samasa, I think, by Arya Shura. Meditative concentration dispenses with inferior sense pleasures and makes awareness, supercognitive abilities, and samadhis manifest. Nagarjuna's letter to his friend says, "It's been raining here." Oh no, I'm sorry. The four meditative concentrations that reject pleasure-seeking conduct, joy, bliss, and suffering, bring the attainment of fortune equaling that of the gods, in great Brahma, clear light, flourishing virtue, and great result. So let's see, these are the four meditative concentrations. One by one overcome pleasure-seeking conduct, the first one. The second one overcomes joy, the third one overcomes bliss, and the fourth one overcomes suffering. And so there's this formulaic or sort of standardized way of describing the dhyana states, the four form absorptions, as being characterized in certain ways. And the first one has joy, bliss, and some amount of suffering, and then progressively the higher ones let go of one of each of those characteristics. And then one attains a fortune equaling that of the gods, and then they list certain god realms that have their address in the formless realm. Their email addresses and their zip codes. The Lamp for the Path of Awakening by Atisha observes that once the yoga of shamatha is perfected, supercognitive abilities are achieved. So supercognitive abilities are being able to fix your laptop, being able to, no, just kidding, are things like this formulaic list of the 6 supercognitive abilities. It's probably in the glossary, but things like being able to, having a divine eye, being able to see without glasses, very far away, and things behind other objects. So like other universes and things like that. Being able to hear long distances, being able to travel long distance instantly, being able to move through earth and water, and being able to emanate different bodies. That's a handy one, a scary one also. And the last one is knowing the minds of other beings. Handy capabilities if you can come upon them. It is said that on the temporal level, meaning not on the spiritual level, Vipassana brings happiness to all beings, in that it teaches us how to reduce our suffering instead of constantly increasing our suffering. And when it recognizes the nature of phenomena, which is the non-temporal or spiritual level, it liberates us from the 3 realms. Once again, from the verses that summarize the Prajnaparamita Sutras, all the enjoyments of the Buddhas, their offspring, Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, and gods, spring from the supreme Prajnaparamita. It also says when Prajna recognizes the nature of phenomena, it takes us beyond all 3 realms. Prajna being, supreme Prajna being the result of Vipassana. The ultimate result of shamatha vipassana is the attainment of complete awakening. The Bodhisattva Bhumibhaya Sangha teaches once the bodhisattvas perfect the paramita of meditative concentration, they have awakened completely to unsurpassable, true, perfect Buddhahood. They will awaken completely, and they are currently awakening completely. That's an odd distinction, but okay. The Prajnaparamita in 700 lines, sutra, one of the shorter ones, says, Manjushri, if they cultivate Prajnaparamita, great bodhisattvas will quickly and fully awaken to unsurpassable, true, perfect Buddhahood. Presumably, cultivating prajnaparamita again is the cultivation of vipassana, or entails or starts with. In the general context of shamatha vipassana, the exalted Gampopa teaches, it is said shamatha vipassana are the doors to all the Dharma teachings. Each has 5 points. Each of shamatha vipassana have 5 points. Cause, function, hindrances, obscurations, and pure path. The cause of shamatha is pure ethical conduct. And we thought it was like repeated application or mindfulness. Pure ethical conduct is the cause of shamatha. Cause of vipassana is the prajna derived from listening and reflecting. Study your books. The function of shamatha is to free us from the bondage of characterizations. Wow, he affiliates that with shamatha. That's weird. Must have got that wrong. Vipassana's function is to liberate us from the bondage of negative propensities. I see. Okay. Yeah. Negative propensities is the tendencies of ignorance, and characterizations is an odd way of phrasing the kleshas, the mental afflictions. Interesting. Thank you for clarifying that, Gampopa. What hinders shamatha is our concern for our body and possessions, and what hinders vipassana is not being satisfied with the words of the noble ones. Busyness and being content with just a little meditation experience hinder both, as I think most of us know. Obscurations, agitation, remorse, and doubts obscure shamatha. Interesting list. Agitation, we know for sure. Remorse, dwelling on the past. Doubts, dwelling in being uncertain, obscures shamatha. Drowsiness and sluggishness obscure vipassana. Pleasure-seeking and malice obscure both. To have subdued sluggishness and drowsiness is the pure path of shamatha. Interesting little switcheroo there, moving the obscuration of vipassana to shamatha. To have subdued agitation and remorse is the pure path of vipassana.
This was the
Interesting
question when
switch.
I read this. Is this correct? It seems
Yeah,
like it's saying, you
the
know,
opposite. It sure does. I don't
and
know,
I
we should
always
add
thought
that.
that, okay, should we add it to the list? Because I always thought drowsiness and sluggishness were
Or
more
shamatha.
associated with
Yeah,
shamatha.
yeah, let's add that to our list for the translator. When those two have fully subdued the two obscurations, you achieve the resultant pure Dharmakaya. And let's see, the two obscurations, just briefly, should be in our glossary of enumerations. See how it is characterized there. Twos. No, it's not there. Okay. That completes the common exposition of shamatha and vipassana together. Now we dive into shamatha, the way to cultivate shamatha and vipassana individually, beginning with the shamatha. And just the overview is the way to cultivate shamatha, the way to cultivate vipassana, and then removing doubts about how to sustain meditation on the view, presumably on the combined practice of shamatha and vipassana. Starting with the way to cultivate shamatha, this has 3 sections: the preparation, the exposition of the objects of meditation. Thankfully, we had a little glimpse of it earlier that was sort of confusing because the author hadn't yet presented them fully. And then the way to practice shamatha. The preparation for shamatha, as explained before, develop the causes for shamatha and avoid the causes of dullness and agitation, which are its obscuration. Not restraining, dullness and agitation, according to Gampopa. Well, not restraining your sense faculties, constantly searching for something to be entertained by, being inattentive of your food consumption, just eating mindlessly, and so forth. We all have a sense of what so forth might be. On a comfortable seat, sit in the 7-point posture of meditative concentration. So let's see, meditative concentration. See page 180 to 81 for a description of this 7-point posture. Let's take a quick glimpse. 180 to 81. It actually, let's see, on the bottom of the page, the generally well-known 7-point posture of meditative concentration is as follows. On a soft and comfortable cushion, sit in the Vajra position, which is full lotus, or if that's not possible, in the Bodhisattva position, which is sometimes characterized as sitting in a chair, usually characterized as that. So anything in between the two should do, like half lotus or what's called siddhasana in Sanskrit. Hold your hands in the mudra of equipoise, meaning your right palm rests on your left, on top of your left, with the tips of your thumbs touching 4-finger width below your navel. So this is a very commonly presented posture. Trungpa Rinpoche also presented the hands on the thighs, which is also pretty common. But we see this version more traditional in more traditional texts, with the tips of your thumb tips touching. Interesting. Straighten your spine and keep your entire body taut. So slight, I think taut may be a little bit more than is meant, maybe sort of keeping it straight. Keep your upper arms and elbows straight, not bent, and your shoulders raised. So here we have a little bit of a mixing with the posture for the 6 dharmas of Naropa, where you're supposed to keep your arms straight and not bend your elbows, which for most humans is impossible. Blair.
Yeah, I was just wondering about the keeping your palms 4-finger widths below your navel, if that had something to do with the origin point.
I'm not I don't know, what is the origin point?
My understanding is when you start learning Vaz breath, that's where the energy is held.
What is Vaz breath?
It's a way you breathe in certain practices.
Your guess is as good as mine.
Actually, there's in the next page, it actually explains what each of the points of posture connects to in terms of the winds, controlling the winds, which I think is traditionally each point of posture in some ways does that. So the leg position is the downward expelling and pressing with the mudra of equipoise below the navel retains the fire coinciding wind.
There you go. Thank you, Cynthia.
Sure.
That resolves it clearly. Daniel.
Yeah, I have a question about posture. Sometimes I'm sitting on a futon. I'm on a cushion on the futon, so my back is pretty straight. But sometimes I put like a wedge so that I'm actually leaning a tiny bit back to relieve some of the pressure on my lower back. Is any contact of the back with something behind you, does that interrupt the flow of energy, or is it okay to have a prop?
I think that would not be considered good posture.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Let's see. Keep your neck slightly bent so that your chin presses lightly towards your Adam's apple. I wonder if the Sanskrit or Tibetan, if they used Adam's apple. What a what a funny phrase that is. Rest the tip of your tongue on your palate and leave a bit of space between your upper and lower teeth and barely close your lips. Your eyes should be in a peaceful gaze, looking into the space beyond the tip of your nose, neither moving nor closed. So beyond the tip of your nose. He doesn't say how far beyond, but other texts indicate that it should be quite close, like eight. There's one text 8 finger widths. You know how they would use finger widths. Um, so it's like really close, and that's for those of you that attended the in-person practice day or hybrid practice day. That was the purpose of sitting facing the wall, was to give you a sense of what looking at the space really close to you feels like, because that is the instruction in Mahamudra texts that I've seen in many Mahamudra texts. So let's come back to where we were on page unnumbered 47. That your
Derek,
breath, yes, sir.
one more question. That gaze that, let's say, it's 8 finger width, it's it's supposed to be kind of a panoramic gaze, right? It's not like looking at a point 8 fingers in front of the nose, but we're trying to relax our vision so we have like a panoramic view.
Well, it's helpful to distinguish between what you might have heard in the tradition of Trungpa Rinpoche, who uses this phrase panoramic vision, panoramic awareness a lot, as we heard last week from some of his students. That Vipassana is panoramic awareness. So there's different options. When we say panoramic, it could have to do with the quality of our awareness, or it could have to do with the quality of our visual focal point.
Yeah, okay.
But basically, the idea is you're not staring at a particular point, but your gaze is relaxed and diffused. But the idea is that the focal point is not far away. The focal point within that diffused gaze is quite close, between 8 finger widths and like a couple of feet or so.
Yeah, thank you.
And when they say looking into the space, that means you're not looking at a point,
Yeah,
because
okay.
space doesn't have any points.
Yeah,
Tara,
thanks.
thank you.
Yeah, I'm kind of confused by that because, Mingyur Rinpoche always tells us to just leave our eyes open and look straight ahead. And I don't know if we've been studying Mahamudra, and I thought that was standard for Mahamudra and Dzogchen meditation.
Yeah, so the phrase look straight ahead doesn't indicate how far your focal point is. It
I
indicates,
thought it was supposed to be like 6 feet, but I don't know.
did he say 6 feet?
I can't remember now exactly what he said. I just know he said that you should have your eyes open and be
You
just
should
looking
ask
straight
him.
ahead, but not looking at a specific thing, just sort of maybe
Yeah,
that panoramic
diffuse.
awareness thing.
Yeah, diffuse gaze or panoramic
Yeah, diffuse gaze,
view.
I'm guessing.
But many of them have this phrase of staring straight ahead without really indicating where they're looking at. And a lot of people have interpreted that as like looking off in the distance. And many of us have spent, including myself, have spent many years studying the wall on the other side of the room.
I
And
don't know. I meditate facing a window, so I'm looking outside, but not looking at any particular object.
yeah, so that's another option. The 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 texts that do specify a length all specify a short length. Now, when you receive meditation instruction in Trungpa Rinpoche's world, they say look 4 to 6 feet ahead,
Yeah, that's
slanted
why, and maybe
downwards.
that's where I'm remembering the 6 feet from.
Yeah, and that is what has been transmitted and passed on in his tradition. But the Mahamudra tradition just says look straight ahead, and the texts that do give an indication of the how far ahead give a very close distance. And if you, I urge you to try it, all of you, to try looking at the space right in front of you. That was the idea of doing the wall gazing. I find it to be radically different type of meditation, and I think it's incredibly helpful for accomplishing Mahamudra meditation, which involves being able to separate the experience of our mind from the experience of what our mind is experiencing. And I'll go over this Sunday, but that's a huge difference, and it's a very subtle difference, and it's not easily identified at first, particularly when you're looking far ahead, far in the distance, or to a large view, is looking at the first step in Mahamudra is to identify the mind, to identify the still mind, the moving mind, and the awareness. And first you identify the still mind. And to identify the still mind, you need to be able to separate the mental faculty from the content of the mental faculty. So that you'll see a lot of the Mahamudra exercises involve practicing with sense perceptions. How do we experience sense perceptions? How do we experience emotions, feelings? And what they're trying to do there is to get you to have a sense of what your mind is, not the object. We are, from the moment we emerge from the womb, and probably well before that, we're ingrained and habituated and then encouraged to affiliate our sense of minding, our sense of mental awareness, with the content of that awareness. And Mahamudra is all about identifying the mind separate from what its content is, and bringing the gaze in really close brings your awareness to your mental faculty in a very profound way, I find personally. So I think it's worth checking out. But certainly not staring at a spot far away, which is not what you've described, Tara. You've described you have an open expanse and you diffuse your gaze. So I'm not saying that, but many of us have. When we have that wide open panoramic gaze, I, at least personally, have spent a lot of time. Basically, whenever a thought arises, my vision settles on an object, and they're completely affiliated. When you have a thought, when you get caught by a thought, you end up staring, and you can help get out of thoughts by realizing that you're latched onto an object, and relax that and open, and then come back into a closer visual focal point, or area, not point. So I think Liz, and then Rob.
I was just going to say that I was there for that class, and it was really that staring at the wall thing was a shocking experience, and it made me realize how in the content of the visuals I am. And
yeah, that's great. That's great. For some people, it's very helpful in that way. Some people hate it. It's like it gives them a headache and they can't stand it, and they're very fixated on this way that they've learned, and they are adamant to not change and not try anything else. People I've encountered, but I'm so happy you were open to checking it out and have that experience.
It's funny. I don't. I want to try it again. I haven't, though.
You should. You know, we all have walls in our house, and you just turn your cushion around. Or you can literally place something on, if you have a table in front of you where you put like a liturgy or something, your chants, put something on the table, and then not necessarily to stare at that thing, but just like, okay, it gives me a focal, like looking at space is, not an easy thing to do, right? So if you have like a support that's like sort of identifies the close in space, it makes it so much easier to do that. So I urge you to check it out. It's very interesting. Rob, thank you, Liz. Thank you, Tara.
It's my understanding that's a Zen practice.
Some Zen schools do wall gazing. You go to these Zen monasteries, and everybody is lined up looking at the wall. They're like looking the wrong way. It's
And
very,
we did it also in a Shambhala practice, where you use the colored glasses,
yeah, yeah. The Maitri
the
rooms,
Maitri space awareness. Yeah,
The
when
Buddha
they're
one.
with the white.
Yeah,
the Buddha
The Buddha
realm.
family. Yeah.
That's
With
cool.
the white,
Cool.
we did practice with the wall. But I recall back when we were still meeting at the Shambhala Center in New York City, you put us through a practice, and you asked us to put the watcher just a few inches away from us, and
Yeah,
that shifted my perspective. I have to say, I owe you a thank you.
a beer. How about a beer?
Yeah, I owe you a thank you for that. That was really helpful. And that quieted things a little bit. And it also there was a little bit of a deer in the headlights moment at first. But that was interesting. And it sounds to me like what you're talking about now is sort of similar.
It is.
Uh,
It's another way of like playing with the fact that we have this ingrained, habituated sense of looking from somewhere at something. And, last week in the meditation, or maybe the week before, I said, see if you can get a sense of where it feels like you're looking from.
right.
And, um, and that's different than like where we're making contact with sense objects. It's like the placement of our eyes and the organization of the neurons and the optic nerve and the cerebrum or whatever, gives us this sense that we're looking out of our eyes. And if you know neuroscience, we're there's no we for starters, and the seeing happens up here. The picture is like put together in the cerebrum, but it remains fragmented and not like complete until it hits up here. And so
Yeah, but it's also directing the mind's eye.
it is. We have this idea that the mind is somewhere and the mind has an eye. We have this idea that, oh, there's this screen and thoughts or memories like play on this screen of the mind. So you can challenge that ingrained fixation by doing things like, well, look in your eyes. See if you can look in your eyes. Look through the back of your head. Look into your head through the back of your head. And then it's like, well, how do you do that? And there's different ways you can do that, looking through the back of your head. You named one of them, just to give that away. And there's another way you can do that. But they're all just playing with this sense of feeling like we have a mind and it's somewhere because we have one. Anything that exists is somewhere. And we know material objects don't occupy space and time, but um, we have this projection that our mind is somewhere. Anyway, that's getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but these aspects of the posture are very important and influential. Emily.
I just wanted to add briefly, when I work with this instruction of looking sort of at or past the tip of your nose, I quickly realize, the side of your nose you see is from your dominant eye. You see it from one side. Like for me, my right eye is dominant, so I mostly see my nose over here. And then when I try to relax that, you suddenly have two noses. And so that to me, and then you're trying to kind of follow between the two noses, sort of space right in front, but immediately sort of noticing your dominant eye and then seeing the two noses does really kind of fracture this coalesced sense of like one depth perception and one set of eyes. And it's that's been interesting to experience when I try this like close up.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, one option is you go cross-eyed, right? If you do 8 finger widths in front of you, you're here, and that's like you go cross-eyed doing it. And I don't think they were like sitting there cross-eyed, even though like years ago there was this image of yogis like sitting in samadhi cross-eyed, right? I don't know if people remember that, but it was like this funny image. But yeah, there is this way of relaxing your gaze and seeing two of everything, right? That's not everybody is easily able to do, but that also helps you gain this feeling of like, oh, there's a visual system that's consists of eyeballs and neurons that is working together to produce a picture. And so we have this picture of the outside world. The outside world is nothing like the picture that we see, right? And that's really hard for us to accept. So when I say right, everybody I think is should be saying, no, it's the way we see it. But
Well, how would we know? I
how
mean,
would
when you
we know?
say that, how do you know that?
Well, we know that atoms have no color,
Oh, okay,
right?
right, okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's just that we don't really know anything other than what is created by our minds to see.
Right. We do have inklings that other beings on this planet, animals, insects in particular, have very different visual experiences. They see X-ray, they see infrared, they see like there's some little insect. I saw an article on this recently. It was mind-blowing. There's some insects that have like 360-degree eyes and that see wavelengths we can't see and depths
So,
and
now, how exactly they know that, I'm not sure I understand, but that's another class.
yeah, that is another class, but I guess it has to do with the way their photoreceptors are arranged and so forth. But it's a fascinating thing that we've we're so indoctrinated by our senses to believe that things exist the way that we perceive them. And again, it's like atoms, they don't have any smell. Atoms don't have a taste. They don't have flavors. You can't get atoms in, a certain flavor. Or sound, they don't have a sound. All of these things are the way that our nervous system experiences them, produces flavors, sounds, tastes, smells, visions. And the outside world is completely beyond any of those things. So, anyway, Inez, what have you found?
Get that. Um, yeah, studying art for a long time and optical illusions and things like that. I
Mm,
I don't know whether I'm playing with my eyes, playing games when I meditate, or sometimes the illusions happen, like blind spots, and all of a sudden something will disappear, or the red color turns green over there. So then it becomes like a fun entertainment. So
right,
I think
right.
the wall
So,
is a good idea.
yeah, to sort of flatten things out. I think you'll have probably more visual hallucinations though with the wall. Which, by the way, Rob mentioned this. Bodhidharma was famous for initiating wall gazing, bringing wall gazing
There's,
to
there's the,
China.
the there's the tradition of 9 years facing the wall.
Right, and he also cut off his eyelids, which I don't recommend for anybody, but he was a bit extreme. But this thing of like visual hallucinations, vision is our dominant sense, obviously, right? And what happens in meditation is we're beginning to disconnect from the whole sensory apparatus by virtue of doing the technique. And so it produces these little blips in our sensory experience. In addition to, there is a blind spot in our visual field where all the nerves go out of the eyeball, right? So if you close one eye and you put your finger up, it disappears at a certain point. You can't see. It's better to do with an eraser, a pencil with an eraser, because the top is different. And if you do it carefully, you can see that the eraser just disappears in that part of our visual field. And unless if somebody tells you that, you read that, you never know that there's a gap in the visual field because the brain just fills it in. And it's like, wow, we can fill in that amount of space of our visual field. What else are we filling in and making up? All those optical illusions that Inez alluded to really are amazingly revealing about the way our visual field functions. As it's a machine. It's like a mechanical apparatus, and it's only as good as as the equipment, and we think it's a completely valid. Anyway, so the gaze is a major part of the posture, obviously, so it's worth spending time on it. But the main thing is to be able to get this sense of what does the mind feel like separate from the content of the mind. And it might also be easier to do if you have a tactile sensation, like if you have an ache or pain when you're sitting, you can feel the ache or the pain, and it can be like a sharp or a throbbing or however you want to describe that pain. And then think about the reaction of your mind. Does your mind contract? Does your mind complain? How does the mind feel when we experience a cut or something on our skin or whatever? Anyway, we were on the bottom of 47, right? The the 7-point posture. Let your breath settle. I'm not going to go into that. As you inhale and exhale, do not make noises, pant, or breathe heavily. Now, this is also different from in Trungpa Rinpoche's world. We say don't manipulate your breath. If you're breathing heavily and panting or noisily, that's fine. Just let it happen. And I think we all know that as you progress in meditation, the breath calms down and it becomes smoother and finer, right? And so they just say that right from the outset. Breathe slowly, without effort. You must also practice with a willingness to tolerate difficulties. The lamp for the path of awakening by Atisha states when shamatha and its branches are impaired, its branches, you may meditate with intense exertion for 1,000 years, but you will not produce any samadhi. So if you don't do the practice correctly, it's a bit of a waste of time. 1,000 years. The first stages of meditation by Kamalashila states you can master shamatha quickly when you disregard the desire for possessions and the like. Properly maintain ethical conduct, have a disposition that readily tolerates difficulties, and apply yourself with diligence. It's such an interesting way to sum up the different things that distract us from meditation, right? Thinking about possessions and the like, ethical conduct, tolerating difficulties, and applying diligence. I guess our to-do lists would be somewhere in there, right? As well as lunch. Let's see, the objects of meditation has 4 parts. The general exposition, who should observe what. It's the explanation of the initial objects of meditation and the way mindfulness and alertness sustain the object of meditation. The general exposition has 4 sections. There's these 4 ways of categorizing or contextualizing meditation objects. And our tendency is immediately to think, oh, these are exclusive categories. Is, what's in one is not going to be in, what's in A is not going to be in B and C and D. But this is not true. There's overlap. It's like presents four ways of looking at potential meditation objects. Not all of them are discrete. Some of them are non-discrete. Some of them are. Anyway, universal. These are specific ways to focus on the latter three objects. So the first one is different ways to experience or to use the latter three objects, purifying behavior, expertise, and purifying mental afflictions, in different ways. They're categorized as four. So universal objects of meditation are also categorized as these four different ways of looking at the other three. So really there's three categories of objects and there's four ways of looking at them, right? The focus on conceptual representations is primarily done during Vipassana. However, here in Shamatha, it has a quality of meditation with characteristics. So let's see. I'll try to expand upon these as we go through them, since he doesn't really do that. So conceptual representations is concepts, right? Everything that enters into our mental apparatus enters in through the five senses, or through some innate propensities that we're born with, if you believe such a thing. And those that enter in from our perceptual systems are non-conceptual, but they get when they get experienced by our mental consciousness, our sixth consciousness, they immediately, in one moment, whatever a moment is, they become conceptualized, which it means they become a general idea. We see something and we immediately identify what it is. We label it, we categorize it, we know it, we recognize it. And things that we don't recognize, we label in a more crude way, like big, small, or square, round, or pleasant, unpleasant, but we may not have a name or something for it. And one of the interesting exercises I like to do is there's this wonderful video that begins for a few seconds and you can't tell what it is. It's this weird combination of visual and auditory experience, and it puts your mind in this state of not recognizing, being able to recognize what you're experiencing. And I'll find it and play it maybe next time, but it's a wonderful way of seeing what does your mind do when it isn't able to label. And this happens to us, like you go into, let's say the lights go out, there's a power outage. And you can't see anything and you hear strange noise, and so our mind begins to make up things, but as soon as we can, we identify, we label, we categorize and associate, and then we live our life through these conceptual images, and these are given different names: conceptual images, mental images, conceptual representations, and so forth. And so when we do Vipassana in the way that it's presented in the Buddhist tradition, other than the Vajrayana, let's say Trungpa Rinpoche's presentation of non-conceptual Vipassana, let's say as a Vajrayana presentation, because it seems very much to be like the way Vipassana is presented in the Vajrayana and Trungpa Rinpoche. It's very explicit about this. He says, in the Sutrayana tradition, the objects Vipassana uses are conceptual, and in the Vajrayana we use direct perception. So the object of Vipassana in the Sutrayana system, which currently this presentation is restricted to, are all conceptual. So we're analyzing what are these conceptual images, and how do they differ from uh, phenomena that were perceived and became the basis for what we call the basis for designation for the conceptual image. So we see colors and shape, and we conceptually designate chairs and tables and computers and people and so forth. And the basis of designation is the shape, the size, the color, things like that are the basis of designation. And then we extrapolate upon that, and say there's a person there. So like when they get really good at making robots, we'll not be able to conceptually designate whether it's a robot or a person. We'll have to have a broader category of person-like thing. And then here in shamatha, however, here in shamatha, it's a quality of meditation with characteristics. So the ideal for shamatha is that we're meditating on a non-conceptual basis of what our senses experience. But the reality is that until you achieve a certain level of experience in the path, you're not able to do that. And we're meditating on a very bare mental representation of perceptual objects, such as the breath, such as the posture, or other objects like a visual object we might use of a syllable or a deity or something like that. 2, we could focus on non-conceptual representations, which is to concentrate on the object of meditation and rest without analytical thinking. So this is another way to do it. And this one is, let's see, it is explained that representation means that the objects upon which we focus are not actually specifically characterized ones. So specifically characterized phenomena are not the object of conceptual cognition. So we say in the Buddhist system of understanding how cognition works, there's conceptual cognition and there's non-conceptual cognition. And non-conceptual cognition cognizes what are called specifically characterized phenomena, which is a clunky and sort of very technical way of talking about aspects or characteristics such as that are experienced by our 5 senses. Our senses, by definition, experience non-conceptual cognition, and so those are non-conceptual objects, which are specifically characterized phenomena. The object of conceptual cognition is called a generally characterized phenomena. That's a mental image, a concept. It's generalized. So we think of a car, and we have a general image of a car. We think of our car, and we have a general image of what our car is. And so it is explained that representations means that the objects upon which we focus are not actually specifically characterized ones, but rather are images of those actual objects appearing to our mind. So the way cognition happens is there's theoretically an outer object that is the object condition, and then there's an inner sense faculty, that's the dominant condition, and then somehow the two meet. Light shines from an object, reflects into the eyeball, or sound waves come into the ear, or molecules of fragrance come into the nose. And those are then transposed into conceptual images by the mental consciousness. So I'm sorry, the outer object is recreated by the inner sense faculty. So we
How
have
is that? How is 1 and 2 different then? Because you basically said that the sixth sense.
yeah. So what he's not really saying here, but is said elsewhere, is that the shamatha uses these images, these representations that are not specifically characterized. So they are the images of the outer object that are the reflex reaction of our senses. So they're the images in our sensory faculties that, in our sense consciousnesses. So the mental consciousness looks at the sense consciousness. I sort of lost my train of thought a minute ago. Sense objects get somehow picked up by our sense faculties, and then the sense faculty creates a consciousness of that object, such as a visual consciousness of a color or a shape. And then the mind, the mental consciousness, looks at that representation and experiences that representation. And the first moment of that mental consciousness, where the object is the sense consciousness, is non-conceptual. But it but then it immediately creates a crude, a very basic level of representation that's not a specifically characterized phenomenon. And then the next moment after that, it associates and labels it.
So that's why the cut, kind of like.
Right. Little Rinpoche talks about little slices. So in shamatha, we're seeing little slices of experience. Yeah, very famous description that he gives of little shamatha slices everything up into little pieces, dices. And so we're trying to experience those sort of very bare conceptual objects that are creations in our mental system before they get more elaborately associated. So, in other words, Vipassana has a discursive conceptual experience, whereas shamatha has a non-discursive conceptual experience, is the way it's somehow somewhere else described in some other places. Because basically, we're not able to remain in the bare perception for more than an unrecognizable fraction of a second. Our experiences of our mental, our sixth sense, when it starts to label things, is when we start to experience the object. We're not actually able to, until we reach like a very high stage of the path, we're not able to connect and experience consciously direct, non-conceptual cognition.
So later, when you start talking about these different objects, and like the objects are the skandhas, are we taking our object and applying the skandhas to it? Or, how do you make the skandhas? I'm having trouble with the way it jumps around.
Yeah, we haven't got to the skandhas yet, but just real briefly, it's very similar to what I was describing earlier of trying to separate the feeling of the mind's reaction to something it experiences versus the content of that experience.
So I have an object and I'm saying to I'm relaxing and I'm picking a skandha to analyze it with the object I have.
I thought you were asking about shamatha on the skandhas.
Yeah, I am, and that's why.
So there's no analysis in shamatha, so that's a big difference.
That's why I got confused, because I'm like, okay.
Right, but first you need to be able to isolate what is perception, what is the third skandha, what is the second skandha, what is the fourth skandha. So when we can identify what is feeling is not emotions, right? Feeling, the second skandha, is just positive, negative, or neutral feeling tone. towards something, right? So when we experience something painful, there's an immediate sort of cringe or retraction of our being from that object. And so shamatha on that skandha would be trying to settle on that experience of feeling in terms of
Okay.
whatever we're feeling at the current moment.
Right. So it's you're just saying, oh wow, look, I'm feeling like I'm rejecting that. I'm accepting. I've had that experience. So that's
Right, without
I'm not I'm not
elaboration. There's
following
no
the
elaboration.
experience. I'm recognizing the positive negative. Okay. I
That's
got
it. That's the difference in shamatha versus vipassana. Whereas earlier it was said that shamatha has a non-conceptual object and vipassana has a conceptual, and he's now refining that, saying, well, really, we can't meditate on a non-conceptual object until we achieve the path of seeing, where we're able to consciously experience non-conceptual objects, but we can relate to them non-discursively in shamatha. Cynthia.
This reminded me of something. I was thinking about this last week as well, that in some prior course, quite a while ago, I seem to recall when we were doing some probably looking at traditional approaches to shamatha or something like that, that there, I guess similar to this thing with skandhas and other topics, that there were these very broad topics that, that were described as being objects of shamatha back then as well. And I guess I could be totally wrong on this, but my sense was somehow that it's like based on the assumption you've already analyzed it, studied it, or whatever, you already know what it's all about. You're simply taking it as an object in a really broad sense, not in any way trying to dig into it. That would be a different exercise. That would be vipassana. But this is just sort of like holding these topics in a more broad way. Is that a correct understanding of that?
Well, I'm not keen on the word broad because that implies that you're sort of like maybe comparing it to things, other things, but it's more experiencing them in a very, like what Chris and I were just talking about, just like a very blunt way, and it sort of goes back to the sutra, the Bahiya sutra, where the Buddha, there's this disciple who comes to the Buddha while he's begging, and he says, "You're not supposed to ask for teachings while I'm doing my alms round." And he says, "Well, I may die the next day. If please, can you, And he says, "Okay, Bahiya, here's the essence. In the seen is only the seen. In the heard is only the heard." So it's that sense of just experiencing feeling as a faculty of our being. And the list you're referring to is they say, and he'll say here and get to, is that you can do shamatha on the skandhas, the ayatanas, and the dhachus. And that's a very broad list. So as you said, it entails understanding previous to meditation what those are.
But yet, I heard what you guys were talking about, but that seemed to suggest that you are just taking one specific piece or moment of experience that happens to be part of, we call it one of the skandhas, but so it's not looking at the skandhas as a whole. You're talking
No,
about some,
each one
okay, I guess that's,
individually,
okay, I guess that's not,
and,
yeah, I
and we'll
guess.
and we'll see this phrase also. It's actually, that's a good segue into this phrase. We'll see examining individually, which is a sort of cryptic phrase that's used to describe the practice, but it's looking at each dharma individually as what is this element of our experience, what is this faculty, what is this characteristic, what is this quality.
It's
It's
beginning to
so
sound
doing,
like the four foundations of mindfulness.
yeah, doesn't it? Except it's not maybe as gory, right? We don't quite get obsessed with the 32 uh, disgusting parts of the body and things, and the 9 cemetery skeletal disintegrations. Anyway, that was rather long-winded. The focus on the limits of existence is twofold. It is to have the mental certainty that thinks this is the only way that things are. They do not exist in any other way in relation to the qualitative. Now, this whole explanation is very elusive to me, and I'm going to have to find other sources on this that describe this because I didn't really get it from this one. It's also to have the mental certainty that thinks there's just this much and nothing more in relation to the quantitative. This whole phrase of qualitative and quantitative, for starters, is elusive to me. Of these, the former is an object of meditation during Vipassana, the qualitative. So there are numerous other sources that describe this. So I'll find one of those that's helpful. The focus to accomplish the purpose. So these are these four ways of looking again at the objects B through D, is to repeatedly familiarize yourself with an object of meditation. Once you have separated from your negative propensities, you will achieve your aim. So a rather confusing way of presenting the objects of meditation, for sure. Not necessarily a very helpful one for starters. Simpler ones are the objects of meditation for purifying behavior. These are specific objects of meditation that purify previous behavior involving the mental afflictions, desire, and so forth, and prevent their subsequent arising. And there are 5. Focus on ugliness. The focus on internal ugliness, such as hair, feces, and urine, presumably inside the body. Like if you open up the body, it would not be a pretty sight. And external ugliness, such as the blue appearance of a corpse and its decomposition. So here we do have the stages of decomposition. The focus on kindness is to arouse the wish to benefit and bring happiness equally to enemies, friends, and people towards whom we have neutral feelings. The focus on dependent origination is to contemplate the 12 links of dependent origination, ignorance and the rest, and the dependent origination of causes and their results. Very interesting that he puts in sort of interesting that he puts in that second way of looking at dependent origination of causation and their results. Which is presumably how the 12 nidanas come about, through the functioning of causes and their results. The focus on the categories of dhatus is done while differentiating the 6 dhatus. So here we have a different use of the term dhatu as the great elements: earth, water, fire, wind, space, and consciousness, as opposed to the 18 dhatus. The focus on the inhalation and exhalation of breath. Finally, something familiar is to count or watch your breath moving in and out, keeping your mind undistracted. Objects of expert meditation. So
Can I ask one question related to the dhatu point that you just made, which is, since he uses the term dhatus in many places going forward, in general, when he uses the term with no context, do you assume that it is the dhatus that are the
I don't know. I think it would depend on context.
But sometimes they don't really give any context, and so I after seeing this, I really wondered,
We'll have
is
to
there any way to
decide when
know?
we get there. I don't think so. We'll have to decide when we get there. I mean, the more common is the 18. And so these objects for purified behavior are generally affiliated with certain characterizations of negative propensities. So the focus on ugliness is used to overcome desire and attachment to sense pleasures related to the body. In particular, the focus on kindness is to overcome aggression. The focus on dependent origination is to overcome ignorance or stupidity, which is a real interesting one, because you might say, well, isn't that Vipassana? And it's not necessarily at this point. Focus on the categories of dhatus is an unusual one that is usually not in this list.
We lost your sound.
We just lost you.
Sorry. Thank you. I hit this cord has a little button on it. So the focus on dhatus, I think, is to overcome pride. This idea that we exist as beings independent from the elements that comprises. Focus on inhalation, exhalation of breath is for those who have a lot of thoughts, a lot of distraction, which is why it's the most commonly presented object for people of this age, this time period. The objects of meditation for expertise, these enable us to refute a self of persons as opposed to a self of phenomena that is not part of, that is thought of as being outside of the skandhas, dhatus, and ayatanas. So it's the idea that there's a self that's separate from the skandhas, dhatus, and so forth. And here the dhatus, I believe, is the 18 dhatus as it's given here. It is. And those, so these are five objects of expertise. I had earlier said three. There are normally three skills or objects of expertise, and here he adds two others. So the expertise in the skandhas is to know that a self and what belongs to a self does not exist apart from the five skandhas. And so this is how these three categories are used to deteriorate or to work to wear away the sense of there being an independent self, is to experience the skandhas, going through the skandhas and comparing them to the sense of a self and seeing if they have similar characteristics, the skandhas and the self. Similarly, with using the dhatus is to know the causal conditions by which they arise from their own seeds. And we tend to think that we are the causal condition, that there's an agent that gives rise to visual consciousness, that we decide to look at something and then we give rise to the visual consciousness of looking at, of a visual field that we're looking at. Whereas the understanding of the way the dhatus works is that they function by cause and result without there being some agent involved separately.
Yeah, so I took that as there's an eye, and the eye has its functions, but it's not my eye. And that's where we make the mistake. We say it's my eye is seeing. So when we say no I dhatu, no this dhatu, we're saying there's no my I dhatu. That's the way I kind of looked at it.
Well, the no I, dhatu, and so forth is from the Heart Sutra, and the Heart Sutra is working on the ego of dharmas, the self of phenomena, and here we're working on the sense of self of persons. And so the Heart Sutra is going the next step and saying that the I dhatu does not exist as an independent phenomena. It has no separate identity itself. But here first we're working with the sense of self that affiliates itself with, as it identifies itself as the agent that decides to create visual experience or so forth. Expertise in ayatanas to know that the six internal ayatanas are the dominant conditions for the six sense consciousnesses, that the six external ayatanas are their object condition, and that the mentation that has just ceased is their immediate condition. So what he's done here in presenting these, and this is an unusual presentation, I don't think I've ever seen this, is he's presented the three of, well, really the two of them, dhatus and ayatanas, as sort of a combination by linking them through what are described as the four conditions for experience in the Buddhist tradition. That begins with the causal condition, which is number 2, and then it includes a dominant condition, which is the sense consciousness, and then the objects, the external ayatanas are their object conditions, and the mentation that has just ceased, the mental sense consciousness of the moment previous to the one I'm experiencing now, is what's called the immediately preceding condition. And so that's an obscure and probably not that interesting observation. But anyway, expertise in dependent origination is to know that the 12 links are impermanent, involve suffering, and lack of self-entity, the 3 marks. Expertise in what is the case and what is not the case, usually called what is true and untrue, is to know that it is the case that the maturation of virtue is pleasing situations, and that it is not the case that the maturation of unvirtue is pleasing situations. In other words, to understand how karmic cause and effect functions. And this is similar to expertise and dependent origination. And interestingly, these 5 topics comprise the first volume of first part of Mipam's Gateway to Knowledge. It goes through these 5 in detail. Objects of meditation for purifying mental afflictions. Different than behavior, presumably. These are objects of meditation that serve as general antidotes for the mental afflictions. There are 2 types. The focus on calmness and coarseness is to focus on the desire, form, and formless realms up to the sphere of nothingness, where the lower ones are comparatively coarse and the higher ones are comparatively calm. And so this is a way of categorizing the Vipassana, the practice of Vipassana, that's practiced by non-Buddhists as well as Buddhists. That's practiced generally. And then the practice of Vipassana as it's done exclusively by Buddhists. And we'll see this later in the section on Vipassana, the types of Vipassana. But the Vipassana that's common to all traditions of meditation is to use your insight to proceed from one level of meditation absorption to the next higher and more subtle one by analyzing in what way is this meditative absorption coarse. And so, for an example, when they describe how to go from the first dhyana, the first meditative absorption, to the second one, you observe that the first meditative absorption has physical and mental bliss involved in it. And that creates a certain level of instability, of coarseness. And you realize that if I were to eliminate the sense of physical bliss or joy, I could experience a more subtle sense of meditation absorption. And so one then eliminates that sense of physical joy and then proceeds to the second absorption state. So this is an obscure point, but most of the objects of meditation is quite obscure. And then what Buddhists do, yeah, Jeff.
Question is, when you say eliminate the feeling of bliss, do you mean not be attached to it?
Well, they actually cultivate, in order to achieve the first absorption state, you cultivate joy, bliss, discursive and sustained thought, and equanimity, these 5 factors. And then to go from the first to the second, you stop cultivating applied and sustained thought and joy, the feeling of well-being that pervades the body. So you're proceeding from like a sense of physical embodiment to a progressively disembodied experience in the absorption states. So then Buddhists focus on the 4 truths is to focus on the 16 aspects, and they say impermanence and the others because impermanence is the first of the 16, and the 16 is a way of giving each of the 4 truths 4 attributes or 4 characteristics or categories. So suffering, the first noble truth, has the categories or characteristics of impermanence, suffering, essencelessness, and egolessness. It has the 4 marks of existence. And then similarly, the remaining 4 truths each have 4
I have a question.
Sure.
So this is saying objects of meditation for purifying affliction. So would this be something that you would be like, okay, I'm going to work on suffering, and then you might take each of those? I mean, how is it used? It's going.
the in this case, like the little sentence that comes after is very helpful. It explained that of these two, the first reduces the strength of the seeds of the mental afflictions, the kleshas. So it sort of subdues the kleshas, and then the latter eradicates them completely, because the latter involves vipassana practice. So one would experience suffering, one would examine your suffering, having already subdued your kleshas through the first type of practice. And basically, this is just another way of characterizing shamatha and vipassana. So the first one would be shamatha, is focusing on the crude level of the kleshas and suppressing them. Now, what I just described and what's described here up to the form and formless realms is an extreme way of pacifying the kleshas before practicing vipassana, and that's the way it's done in the earliest tradition of Buddhism that we find in the Pali Canon records, whereas later traditions have a lesser attainment of calming meditation as the basis for then shifting to the Four Noble Truths and understanding suffering, its cause, its cessation, and the path. So all of the practices in Buddhism from Hinayana through Vajrayana break down into the Four Noble Truths and to understanding and experiencing the Four Noble Truths. And so you would meditate initially on subduing kleshas, and then you would analyze what causes suffering, impermanence. The experience of impermanence causes suffering. And you would see that samsara is impermanent, and impermanence causes suffering, or is suffering. And then you would go progressively through those 16
But that is not
aspects.
shamatha.
No,
You're saying
that'd be
that would be,
insight. That would be
yeah.
vipassana. Yeah.
But in
And
the context of where it is here, I'm a little bit puzzled, because it, like in the next sentence, or it does seem to be saying they're talking about doing this without analysis, kind of more like as if it's a shamatha version of that. So I was wondering, I mean, what you just said is the same interpretation I had when I first read those 2 points, of the first being shamatha, the second being vipassana, but it does seem like in the context of this, they're talking about it as a shamatha exercise.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, but shamatha never, I mean, from the get-go, they tell you shamatha is not going to eliminate, anything.
Right. I understand. That's the point. That's the reason why this is a little bit confusing.
Well, I think you're just mixing in a little Vipassana into our shamatha chapter here.
that's a good point. Yeah, which I just did. I just mixed in a whole bunch of Vipassana. I put in like an extra helping of Vipassana into our shamatha chapter on these 4 objects of meditation. But it is unclear. I agree with your point, Cynthia, that the second one, in order to eradicate kleshas, that's by definition is Vipassana.
Right.
And so the sentence afterward is confusing. And that's not unusual for these things to be confusing. And this whole section is not, like, what's the takeaway from this whole section? Focus on the breath is what we do. And the rest of it is like, I've seen better descriptions of these that I find more helpful. I'll share, but um, it's a standard presentation of the objects, and it's certainly worth trying to understand and trying to squeeze some juice out of somehow. Okay, who should observe which objects? Why don't we just like I'll just assign them to you as you appear on the screen. Just kidding. As for which individual should focus on which objects of meditation for purifying behavior, the Shravakabhumi of Asanga quotes the sutra in the questions of Revata. If bhikshu yogins who are practitioners of yoga find they are dominated by attachment, they should focus on the mind on ugliness as the object of their meditation. I just mentioned this. If their behavior is dominated by aggression, they focus on kindness. If behavior is dominated by bewilderment, they should focus on dependent origination of this condition. If pride is what they entertain, they should focus their minds on differentiating the dhatus. It continues, if their behavior is dominated by thoughts, they should concentrate on being aware of the inhalation exhalations of their breath, and that way they concentrate on the appropriate object of meditation. As for which individuals should focus on which object of meditation for expertise, the same sutra, again cited in the Shravakabhumi, says, if bhikshu yogins who are practitioners of yoga are confused about the characteristics of formative forces, or which is like samskaras, the fourth skanda, or if they are confused about the entity of itself, the sentient being, the life force, the one reborn, the one nourished. It's this amazing list of the ways that we characterize me. I am the one reborn, nourished, or the person. They should focus their mind on the objects for expertise on the skandhas. So if you have a heavy fixation on the sense of self, if they are confused about causes, they should concentrate on the objects of expertise and the dhatus. Now, it's a little bit odd. I don't think people are particularly fixated on causes necessarily. I think we're all fixated on a sense of self. So it's a little bit odd to separate that out, but those people who are fixated on causes should concentrate on the objects of expertise in the dhatus. If confused about conditions, they should focus on the ayatanas. So this is like if we feel I think it's more like if we affiliate our sense of self as being the agent who decides what to experience. If they are confused about impermanent suffering or the absence of self, they should focus their mind on the objects of expertise, independent origination, and on what is and is not the case, which is karma. As for which individuals should focus on which objects of meditation for purifying the afflictions, the same sutra says those who wish to be free from the attachments of the desire realm of the three realms should concentrate on the coarseness of that realm and the calmness of the form realm, which is talking about absorption meditation. Those who wish to be free from the attachments of the form realm, which is immensely desirable in terms of forming attachment. The experience of being in a form realm absorption is extremely pleasurable, should focus on the coarseness of that realm and the calmness of the formless realm. And those who wish to become disenchanted with and freed from everything related to the perishing collection, which is a very odd but common stock phrase for the collection of skandhas that's taken to be a self, the perishing collection, should focus their mind on the truth of suffering, the truth of its origin, in other words, the Four Noble Truths. If you're an individual whose behavior balances the mental afflictions, or someone with few mental afflictions, it's fine to concentrate on whichever one you like. And the quote from the Shravakabhumi supports that. I'll skip. And let's see. The explanation of the initial objects of meditation. We may wonder, among all these, which we focus on first? Although we train with the objects that are suitable for each one of us as individuals, importance for those of us with a preponderance of thoughts to meditate on our breath. So he's gone through this laborious presentation of the traditional list and concluded with what we all knew from the start from our teachers and tradition: focus on the breath. It's also necessary to rely upon just one branch or technique of mental concentration in the beginning. And that's very important. If we do lots of different practices, we basically get nowhere in all of them. The lamp of the path of awakening by Atisha says, rest your mind in virtue, using any one object of meditation. Arya Shura makes a similar remark: stabilize mental concentration by relying on one object of meditation. Letting your mind pursue many objects of meditation will agitate it with afflictions. It's explained that the initial focal supports are of many types. There's not just one prescribed object of meditation. Acharya Bodhibhadra says here shamatha is twofold, one that is attained through looking inward, and the other by focusing on something seen externally. Looking inward takes two forms: focusing on the body and focusing on what is based on the body. Focusing on the body is threefold. Focusing on the body is a deity. Wouldn't have been the first one I thought of, but focusing on the body is a deity. Focusing on the body is ugly, such as being a skeleton, sort of a Halloween practice, and focusing on the body as a special symbol, such as a kadvanga. It's an interesting symbol to pick.
I think, yeah, the Katvanga's pretty gross. I mean, it's these three heads. One is a live head, one is a rotting head, one
I
is a
agree.
shriveled head. And I'm
I
like,
was
I'd rather focus on the skeleton.
I was thinking I would focus on the symbol of the dollar
There
symbol.
you go. Yeah.
Focusing on what is based on the body is fivefold. Focus on the breath, subtle symbols, bindus, light rays, on joy and bliss. So there's all these possible objects of focus, which is um, which is um, an interesting point, is that we can develop shamatha on any of these objects, and then any of these objects are used, and we'll see that there's a gradation of objects that's then presented later on. Focusing on something seen externally is of two kinds: special and ordinary. Special is twofold: focusing on the body and speech. It's a cryptic, obscure category.
It's what's also funny in these, oddly to me, is that in that first dichotomy of focusing on the body and what is based on the body, and then they proceeded to name three things that are not the actual body, at least not in our ordinary thinking. And so the way they categorized it was exactly the opposite the way as to how my mind would have categorized those. You know, you tend to think of things like breath and all that other stuff as being part of, you know,
Yeah,
body. And then even
it
here
is
where it
odd.
says something that's external, and it calls that the body again. So it's like it really flips any idea of what's external and internal.
Yes, definitely an
It's
unusual
also
presentation.
it's also highly conceptual, actually, to think of yourself as a skeleton or of a katvanga, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, that struck me as really odd that they would call that focusing on the body. I mean, it's weird.
Because I mean, the breath is the body, or feeling your weight on the cushion is the body, you know. Thinking of yourself as a three-headed Tibetan symbol, that's to me highly conceptual.
Thank you. Same thought I had. It's interesting to see how
Never.
they care.
That being so, those who reject concentrating the mind on a pebble, a twig, or a bindu have simply not seen such comprehensive presentations. Nevertheless, most texts on the stages of meditation explain that we should concentrate on the image of the Tathagata's form, since that involves many great purposes, such as giving rise to merit, amassing the accumulations of merit and wisdom, and purifying obscurations. It is truly excellent. The king of Samadhi Sutra states the protector of the world is beautiful in all ways, with a body like the color of gold. Those who rest their mind upon this object are said to be bodhisattvas in meditative equipoise. The final, or i.e. third, stages of meditation by Kamasila says, first, yogins and yoginis should practice shamatha by placing their attention on whatever they have seen and heard about the Tathagata's form. Thus, we should practice resting our mind on that one type of focal support. When our concentration has improved and become more stable, then we can practice with any of the previously mentioned objects of meditation. The first of the three stages of meditation comments: when your concentration is improved, then you should focus in detail with specific objects such as the skandhas and ayatanas. And maybe we can go a couple of minutes over. We'll finish this section to The proper practice of samadhi is crucial. First, we should be certain about the identification of mindfulness and alertness, and dullness and agitation. According to the previous explanations that we saw in the first chapter, here mindfulness properly maintains the stream of awareness in which your mind is not distracted from its object of meditation. Alertness recognizes whether our mind has strayed from that or not. So one is a focused attention, and the other is a diffuse, open awareness, open attention. The text explanation of the ornament of the Mahayana Sutta, commentary on the Mahayana ornament of the Mahayana Sutras, mindfulness and alertness create a close focus because the first prevents the mind from straying from its object, and the second recognizes when it has strayed. Our mind is like an untamed elephant. The tether of mindfulness binds it to its object of meditation, which is like a sturdy post. If it doesn't stay there, alertness, like an iron hook, catches it and gradually brings it under control. Sort of violent imagery. The analogy is explained in the Heart of the Middle Way. The wayward elephant of our mind is fastened securely to the sturdy post of the object with the tether of mindfulness, gradually tamed by the iron hook of prajna. So affiliating alertness with prajna. If we become too light or concentrated, so this affiliation of alertness with prajna is very interesting. The missing piece there is, of course, vipassana would be the step in between. So alertness is sheshan in Tibetan, prajna is sherab, and vipassana would be the step in between alertness and prajna. It's a little bit of a leap. If we become too tight or concentrated by being overly diligent, agitation will arise. If we're too relaxed, our mind will become slack and dull. Seek flawless samadhi on the edge where tightness and looseness rather are balanced, and sustain that. So not too tight, not too loose. Chandragoman laments, if I apply exertion, agitation arises, or I abandon that, slackness occurs. If it is so hard to find the right balance between those, what should I do with my disturbed mind? Good question. Huh? His praise of confession continues. If I engage with effort, agitation, the result, if I loosen up, slackness ensues. If it is so hard to find a practice in their middle, what should I do with my disturbed mind? And the next section is what to do. And so we'll start with that next week on page 55. The way to actually practice shamatha finally. Final comments quickly. Any very short ones? Good.
Enjoy the eclipse.
Oh, yeah. Monday the 8th. I hope the weather is clear enough for those who are in the place to see it can. Here's our dedication down below. By this merit may all attain omniscience, may defeat the enemy wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom, may the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled, may all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. Thank you, everyone, for bearing through that rather abstruse presentation of the objects. And have a wonderful week, and see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. Good
Thank you.
night.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.